The argument that is typically made by gender theorists is that gender is entirely separate from sex. You've seen the argument made that it makes no difference on average if men are stronger than women are, and that if we were to allow transgender women to compete with non-transgender women, then this would somehow not disadvantage biological women. And this seems to me absolutely ascientific, that if we're actually going to have a discussion about gender and sex, that should be based in data, which suggests that mammals are in fact binary in terms of their sex, unless you have intersex birth defects typically, or genetic defects.
I'm happy to opine on this. This only matters because today we segregate nearly all sports by gender. Otherwise, why do you even give a shit what someone identifies with? So we live in a free country, and with consenting adults and people free expression of who and what they are.
Man, on adult level, I agree with you. I think it does matter what you teach your children.
That's what I'm saying. And so there's the matrix of what you are biologically, how you express yourself, who you choose as a sexual partner. If we actually live in a free country, as we tell ourselves, people's freedom to behave in any of those ways should not concern you at all. Nor are they requiring that you behave that way. Okay?
Well,
this is for their own freedoms, because we live in a free country. Now, what is unresolved here is, what do you do with sports? It's unresolved. And I've followed that closely, and I don't see any meaningful solutions to come down off of that. We know that hormones manifest differently in different people, and just the whole thing with steroids. Steroids are hormones, right? And we rallied against steroids in professional sports because it gives you an undue advantage. So, and I've tried to think of what the future of sports would be in the world of a gender spectrum. And it may be, you don't specify whether it's a male or female sport. You just take measurements of what your hormonal balances are. And so you compete based on your hormones. I mean, this is thought I had. I don't know. I don't know where it's going to land.
The WNBA won't be in business for very long if that's the case.
It would just be you'd have to find some way to compete people against each other if you still care that sports is an interesting activity.
I guess the area where it does come up in a non-sports area.
Yeah, tell me. I don't know.
So it would be, you talk in your book about the education of children and teaching children about science. And right now, children are being taught about the quote-unquote gender spectrum, which is not scientifically based. That is a theory-based idea.
No, wait, hold on. People express themselves on a spectrum. So you learn that.
That's a social point, not a scientific point. Meaning we express ourselves
hold on.
based in different languages. Is that something you teach in science class, or is that something that you teach when you're teaching language?
So whether the fact that people want to express themselves on a spectrum, on a gender spectrum, whether that fact is something you want to put in a sociology class or in a science class, maybe that remains to be determined. But it is a real fact about real society.
Well, of course, nobody's denying that people identify how they want to identify.
I call this meeting of the Free States of America to order. Who died and made you the king of freedom? I'm in charge because Governor Redacted is gonna run for president. Duh. Why'd you call him Governor Redacted? Oh, because I'm getting ready to pass a blogger bill, so any blogger or content creator that talks about Governor Redacted is gonna have to register with the state or pay a fine. That's fair. With that being said, I figured we could just go around the table and talk about our ideas to make our state even more free. I just passed a bill that bans insurance companies from covering transgender healthcare. Now that is how you weaponize a broken healthcare system. I still hate you, Oklahoma, but the way you make poor people suffer is truly admirable. You guys are just too sweet, I tell you what. Speaking of insurance, I added a provision so that if you take an insurance company to court and win, you still have to pay the legal fees. Oh, that's nice. Oh yeah, and another bill that would let courts legally seize custody of children that are currently being taken care of by guardians that support and love them for being trans. Nothing says freedom quite like forcing parents to parent a very specific way by threat of removal of their kids. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I got one. I suggested we ban gay marriage again. A 1996 called They Want Their Legislation Back. Banning gay marriage really takes me back. I remember like it was only 8 years ago. Oh, I have one. I redesigned my state flag. What? That's nice, Utah. Who invited him?
I've won the debate on drag and why it's an essential part of American culture. Come with me, you will not be disappointed. Here's my cat. Okay, stay with me. In World War I and in World War II, we put on musical reviews to raise money for the U.S. Army. Crazy, insane, I know. One of them exists on film because they turned it into a movie, and 100% of the profits from this movie went straight to the U.S. Army. And guess what it features? This is a cast of 300 active duty World War II soldiers. These are all men who, when they finished this performance, went back to the front lines.
Merrily we appear on the scene, hostess of the stage door canteen. It's Lynn Fontaine.
But we've got celebrity impressions.
What a lovely group of soldier boys we have here tonight.
Bits.
Now,
Don't worry, it's not the only drag number. You thought it was just the one? We've got so many drag numbers. In corsets and dresses. Darling, this is as American as it gets. Oh, I know what you're gonna say. But it's not for children, right? These are for adults.
Gosh, just like he looks in the newsreels.
hey fellas, the president.
Performing for children and the president in full drag. The Army is performing in full drag for children and the President of the United States in 1943. It is as American as it gets. So do not tell me that this is not anything other than a patriotic form of artistic expression that has been around for a long time. But I'm not done. Because guess who's the lead? Guess who's your leading man in 1943's This Is the Army full of drag? Ronald Reagan. This is drag funded by the U.S. Army to raise money for the war against Hitler, starring Ronald Reagan. I rest my case.
I'm co-owner of 4 businesses in Nashville that are welcoming to everyone but cater predominantly to the LGBTQ+ community. My businesses alone have contributed more than $13 million to the state in form of sales and liquor taxes since we opened. Our shows are fun, lively, campy, theatrical, clever, dramatic, and joyous, but never of a prurient nature, and our performers are certainly not adult cabaret performers. We know this because we have a Tennessee liquor license and are bound by Tennessee liquor laws. Another business of ours offers a downtown bus tour hosted by drag performers, and it's frustrating to us that a fully costumed drag queen seen through a bus window lip-syncing Tina Turner might be charged under this bill, especially since not one of our performers on this bus has ever shown more skin than a Titans cheerleader on a Sunday afternoon. And who else might be included? It's been noted. Is it the group of birthday girls in Memphis that decides to dress like Elvis for the night and dance on the street? Or megastar Harry Styles as he performs in Knoxville in a dress? Are our theaters and T-Pack, when they want to perform Hairspray, Chicago, or Mrs. Doubtfire included, can they be arrested and charged? And what about Halloween? Can my daughter walk down the public street as Batman? Just a few days ago, Governor Lee asked for a return to civility, and I applaud that sentiment. I believe in being civil and welcoming to all Tennesseans. But legislation like this isn't about civility or even protecting our children. It's about curtailing business and the free expression of our citizens with a giant can of worms regarding interpretation and enforcement, and I ask you to oppose this bill.
When all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a culture war. So you got a political faction that really doesn't have a lot of answers for many of the questions that people are wrestling with. They love talking about gas prices, but they don't have an answer on gas prices. They don't have an answer on inflation. Many of them answered our call for bipartisan infrastructure work with a no. Haven't seen an answer on what to do about the price of prescription drugs. They voted against lowering that. Don't have an answer on what to do about the cost of childcare. Don't have a great answer on taxes. Actually want to raise taxes for the poor. That's a new one. I thought I'd seen it all. Then I saw Senator Scott's proposal to raise taxes for the poor. That's not great territory for them to be debating on. So what do? They find somebody vulnerable and pick on them, which at the moment is largely the trans community. And they find something to talk about which can go between the laughable, like is Donald Duck going to make your kid gay, to the incredibly dark, which is the suggestion that the very presence of someone who is gender nonconforming or trans or gay or lesbian or otherwise different, that the very existence of somebody like that is an adult subject.
This study came out last month and looked at the rate of regret amongst those undergoing gender-affirming surgery. So they looked at every patient they had from 2016 to 2021, and out of those 1,989 patients, 6 regretted having undergone gender-affirming surgery. 6. That's 0.3%. You may be wondering, how does that compare to other surgeries? Well, those who have cosmetic surgery, about 14% of them regret that choice. And this study, which came out a few years ago, looked at, they did a systematic review. So they looked at a number of different types of surgery, both involving cancer and those not involving cancer, and found similarly a 14% rate of regret. So all that tells us that the rate of regret for gender-affirming surgery is exceedingly low.
Whenever I talk about being transgender with any kind of proximity towards children, people are always like, stop pushing your agenda on them. Just forcing this on them. Stop trying to make kids trans. Or my favorite, kids don't need to learn about gender. As if they don't already learn about gender. Kids are taught implicitly or more commonly explicitly about gender from the time that they were born. Before kids are even understanding words in a typical cis-het relationship, we are saying, this is mommy, this is daddy. Those are gendered terms. We say, this is a little girl, this is a little boy. Oh, so-and-so's sister, so-and-so's brother. All of that is gender. Oh, but we don't want to sexualize children. Guess what? People do that too. Oh, she's gonna be a little heartbreaker. Oh, he's so charming, he's gonna get all the girls. People say this about kids all the time. It's not necessarily good, but people do it, and there's no problem with it unless it's queer. You might notice that entire stores are gendered. The girls section, the boys section, boys clothes, girls clothes, boys toys, girls toys. We even do it down to color. The general population has absolutely no problem with gendering or sexualizing children as long as it's cisgender and straight. And they actually do force it on kids. I am a queer transgender man. I spent my whole life being told that I needed to be cisgender and straight. Nobody forced queerness or transness on me, even though I did learn about it. But the whole world forced straightness and cisness on me. This whole narrative about how people like me, trans and queer people, are forcing trans and queerness on others is completely made up. It's lies, propaganda, intended to manipulate you. The only people who are doing the forcing are the straight cis people, trying to force trans and queer people not to be trans and queer. The spoiler alert, we don't want your cis kids to be trans. We want trans and queer kids to survive.
And you've already signed into the sheet. All right, thank you very much. The time is yours.
My name is Bree Martin. I'm an editor of the West High newspaper. I work at a local candy shop, and I'm a proud trans woman. We are not your enemy. We breathe the same air as you, we eat the same food as you, and our lives cross paths at every bus stop or pizza joint you attend. The ideas being presented today as safety procedures are directly antithetical to the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that this great nation was founded on. Many have questioned my safety as someone receiving hormone therapy, and let me make clear that the medical interventions I am receiving are nothing short of life-saving. I work regularly with multiple teams of medical professionals who have ensured that my mental and physical health were prioritized throughout my entire transition process. My privilege as someone who was able to start hormones early was informed by the experiences of those who tread the path before me. And because of my early access to blockers and estradiol, me and my family were saved from the arduous and painstaking task of adult transition. I would like to make clear that no matter the opposition, transitioning was always the only option for me. Being born as a trans person is no different from being born with diabetes or anything else that requires medical treatment. Yes, there are inherent risks in the treatment of anything, but that is why medical professionals work for their degrees. It takes years with countless therapists, doctors, and other professionals to get to the point where surgery is even considered in the state of Utah. It should continue to be up to the world of medicine to decide the best course of action, and not only does taking that decision away overstep the role of government, but it leads to pain and suffering for kids like me and our families. I am your example of 3 years of hormones doing good. I am not a victim. I am not a passing fad. I am not an exception to a rule. We deserve continued access to health care that medical professionals have already deemed necessary. I deserve a body to feel proud of.
Thank you very much.
A common argument I see against preferred pronouns is that you can't control how people perceive you. I see a lot of transphobes saying stuff like, oh, well, people don't have preferred adjectives. This is meant to be sort of gotcha moment, but let's actually analyze this argument for a second. First of all, people do have preferred adjectives. For example, if you call a man pretty and he says he actually wants to be called handsome instead, if you're not a prick, you'll switch what adjectives you call him. Secondly, a lot of adjectives have distinctly different meanings. For example, if you say he is ugly versus he is beautiful, that's a very different statement. But if you say he is beautiful versus she is beautiful, the only thing that changes is the perceived gender of the subject. The meaning of the sentence is still the same regardless of what third-person pronouns you use, so why would you go out of your way to make someone uncomfortable by using the incorrect pronouns? Gender is socially constructed, and pronouns aren't biological. Language changes and evolves as humans change and evolve. Maybe I can't control how each person perceives me, but they can control how they see me, which is why it's the responsibility of transphobes to unpack and correct their biases. It's not a trans person's job to educate anyone. My pronouns are he/him, and my adjectives are hot/sexy. Good day to you all.
My name is Hildy Edwards. I'm 12 years old. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a proud transgender 7th grader. I'm a daughter, an actor, a big sister, an advocate, and last summer I was the youngest Grand Marshal in Twin Cities Pride history. I'll also be Olaf in my spring musical at my middle school, Frozen. I'm here today to ask you to protect my friends, to protect their parents, and to protect their doctors. I'm lucky enough to get to go to a summer camp that's just for trans kids. I'm excited to go again this year. It's amazing to build community with an all-trans staff, role models I can look up to, and know that everyone at camp gets me. Kids come to this camp from all over the country. As I get older, and as I hear about other kids' experiences in different cities, I've been shocked to fully understand that in the United States in 2023, a person's success and human rights can be determined by the state in which they were born. How is it possible that I can be protected from discrimination in Minnesota, but can't even go to a doctor in Utah? I know many of my friends are hurting, and their pain is real. Too often, debates like these get warped using weird political language, and people forget that we are actually talking about real people, real families, real healthcare professionals who are up at night thinking about their patients' success. Most trans kids aren't going to show up at a hearing like this because it isn't safe for them to do so. But they shouldn't have to endure public spectacle to get their needs met. I hope most people here today never have to experience what it's like to have large rooms of people formally act like there are two sides of your existence, but that there's a room for debate about the person you were born as, who you are, who you love, or if you even have value. While my humanity isn't currently up for debate in Minnesota, there are still thousands of queer and trans people in other states whose governments are failing to see their humanity and criminalizing their existence. They are making it illegal for people to follow the advice of their doctors. I see politicians talk about liberty and about principles of limited government. I can't think of anything more out of control with the government than having old people with no qualifications or expertise interfere with the decisions families make about the health of their kids. It's pretty gross. Most of the people speaking in opposition to this trans refuge bill have never even had a conversation with a trans person, but they feel comfortable taking away the trans people's dignity and autonomy. I know you all can't write a bill to stop people from thinking and feeling horrible things about me, or my siblings in the LGBTQIA+ community. I know you can't control what happens in Utah, Texas, Florida, Oklahoma, Missouri, or the growing number of states across the country who are using trans people, especially trans kids, of all of them, as a means to gain political power. But you can make Minnesota different. We can all lead together. Trans people, no matter where they come from, should feel confident that Minnesota will be a place where they are valued for their full, authentic selves. The starting point for that show of support should be letting people make healthcare decisions with their doctor, allowing safe haven for parents who are being criminalized for following the best practice guidelines of their healthcare providers, and making it clear that Minnesota won't honor the outrageous laws and penalties from the other states. I said starting point just a second ago because basic human rights should not be an end goal. I look forward to the day where Minnesota laws not only allow me to exist, but when they are written to make sure trans kids like me are affirmed and celebrated for the amazing people they are. Thank you. I will be taking questions maybe as long as they're positive, because I am a child.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am getting very tired of standing up on bills that are directly impacting my community. Obviously, I'm a strong no vote on this. The bill purports to be about drag, and let me start by saying what drag is. Drag is art. Drag is beautiful. Drag is important to my community. My community and the rest of the LGBTQ community. There were comments about people who had gone 30 years ago to drag shows and saw an adult-focused experiences. There's questions as to why are children coming to them now? Well, I'll tell you what happened. We lived. We lived through the AIDS epidemic. We lived through people trying to disallow our marriage. We adopted children. We grew up. And now we're taking some of our children and sharing an art form that's valuable to our community in a way that is age appropriate to them. That's why if you would have come to the drag show on Saturday, what you would have seen is people in full-length dresses, in beautiful gowns, celebrating our art, our history, and the fact that we're alive today. That's what it is. And to answer the sponsor's question directly, why should children be there? That's why. Because it matters to us and our community, because we lived. Additionally, this bill goes beyond drag. Yes, as my representative in the back said, to other art forms, but it also targets trans people. So the bill itself says it bans male or female impersonators. There is a potential that this could be interpreted as banning trans people specifically. What I would say is, given that this bill targets public spaces, this has a direct impact on our ability to hold Pride events, as our annual Pride events do have public drag performances in spaces. And to remind people again what Pride is a celebration of my community's history. My community is surviving the many things that have been thrust upon us by people who wanted to exterminate us. Lastly, I would say...
Keep it to the bill.
Lastly, I would say when we think of impacts, I clearly am impacted by this and hurt strongly. I also worry for the rest of my community who has to see bills like this brought forward. And I had to take a call from a 14-year-old child who tried to take her life after listening to the testimony.
Your time has expired.
Thank you. Vote no on this bill.
The trans debate is starting to look a lot like the Jewish question.
As a Jewish person, I do not take references to the Holocaust lightly. Obviously, I don't think many of us do. Let's start with this. Years ago, the Holocaust Museum put out early warning signs of fascism, disdain for human rights, identification of enemies, scapegoats as a unifying cause, etc., etc. Now, people are saying things, generally non-Jewish, non-trans people, are saying things like, this isn't like Nazi Germany or pre-war Nazi Germany. They're not shipping trans people out in... It's been 90 years since the Holocaust. Like, believe it or not, things change. How we receive and process propaganda is going to change. A good way to get propaganda and information of the Jewish question was on this newsstand. Obviously, that's how people received their news at the time, where it says, without a solution to the Jewish question, there's no salvation for the German people. So if in the 1930s, the best way to spread information was through a newsstand, you can relate that to watching the news on television now, watching TikToks, Twitter, etc., where, just in the last week, on March 6th, we heard Michael Knowles speak on the same stage as Donald Trump, saying that transgenderism must be eradicated with an entire crowd of applause. One thing that has not changed is how genocide is defined. And you can look at these yourself, but let's just look at the final and definitely not least important, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. For those of you paying absolutely no fucking attention, there is a bill in Florida that if it becomes law, it would literally remove transgender kids from supportive houses, even kids who are at risk of gender-affirming care and ultimately could criminalize parents. Now let's look back here for a second. What defines genocide? Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or part. And again, for those of you living under a fucking rock while this happens to trans people, we can see here that Tennessee will be forcibly detransitioning trans youth in the next year. And of course, we're seeing the introduction of bills that, if become law, which some of them are well on their way, both kids and adults who are trans will lose the right to transition and ultimately be criminalized for it.
A few months ago, I walked into my classroom before school like I always do, but this time there was a cop there waiting for me. He was there because a serious threat had been made against my life and the lives of my students. Someone, in an anonymous email, had made it very clear that they were both willing and able to hurt me while I was teaching. It's something I still don't quite know how to talk about, but I think that we have to. These threats happen because of books. More specifically, these threats happen because of a fear of books. It's a fear that we've all seen growing, and it's manifesting in unthinkably ugly ways. It's meant to ignite the worst parts of us, in the same way that many queer teachers are getting used to hearing ourselves called groomers. But we can't let it distract from what we believe. And what I believe is this: that every student has the right to read and to see themselves represented and celebrated in literature. And that banning books, clearing out libraries, and threatening to hurt teachers does not make fewer queer kids. It scares the ones that we have into silence. So now, it's Read Across America season, and it was founded by the National Education Association in 1998 because they understood then what's still true now. Reading books that challenge us to understand ourselves and each other can only serve to close the kind of gap that inspires someone to hate so hard they only see room for violence. You can text BAND to 48744 for a recommendation for a banned book of your very own, and we can keep asking the same question Ray Bradbury asked in his classic banned book. Do you read any of the books that you burn?
Yesterday, a heroic woman and information activist who previously exposed the no-fly list published 2,603 emails between lawmakers, legal advocacy groups, conservative politicians, influencers, and hate groups. These emails show a vast right-wing conspiracy to promote anti-trans legislation and trans panic, effectively giving us a paper trail of how they have engineered a genocide against trans people, and namely trans youth. In these emails, it becomes quite apparent just how manufactured this bigotry is, despite many LGBTQ folks already shedding light to that fact. These emails show things like Fred Deutsch, who is a main figure in all of this, circulating the ACLU press release with the forwarded message, "We will need to respond to the suicidal thoughts" quote. That quote illustrated that trans youth with families who affirm their identity have a 52% decrease in suicidal thoughts and a 48% decrease in suicide attempts. This is only one of hundreds of examples in those emails wherein medical, credible data backs gender-affirming care, and then you have these phonies banding together to figure out how to fabricate a response to divert from the real data. This is an excerpt from Maya's website. She is the one who published all of these emails. And here she highlights some of the main experts who are called across the country to testify on these bills, again, as experts, when in reality, these organizations are made up. They do not have any credibility. And many of the doctors who testify on their behalf, I don't even know how they have licenses if they do. And actually, Dr. Andre Van Maal of the Christian Medical and Dental Associations and American College of Pediatricians was someone who testified on one of the bills in Kentucky. I watched him do it. And here are some of the organizations that have been involved. I also want to name the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine. You can hear how these organizations will use language that makes them sound medically credible whenever they are not. But all of this is linked in my bio at the top link in my link tree.
So, like I think many Jewish kids, there was a period of time growing up where I became unhealthily, probably obsessed with the Holocaust. I read every single kid's chapter book I could find on the subject until I gave myself some really intense recurring nightmares. And I read these books in part, like, I think the way a lot of people read true crime podcasts now, because I was really obsessed with surviving, and so I would read them and think in every situation, like, here's what would I have done differently, how would I have escaped, you know? And I felt so sorry for the victims of the Holocaust because it was such a tragedy that they hadn't, you know, taken the signs seriously enough or gotten out in time, or they had, you know, the ones who tried to flee and turned back. In a way, in kind of a really messed up way, it was like I saw the victims of the Holocaust in my like 8-year-old brain as people who failed to get out and failed to survive. I'm descended from people who got out in the nick of time. Like, those were the stories that were told in my family. And I've always thought of myself as a coward and a really risk-averse person. And I wrote about this in my book, Depart, Depart, that like I feel a direct line from the generational trauma of like being extremely risk-averse or cowardly is what saved us, you know. But I don't think ever in my life, like until this moment, have I really... Being a trans person in Texas right now, I don't think I've ever really given my due to the people who chose to stay. And there must have been millions of them. And it wasn't that they couldn't get out. It wasn't that they were on a ship that turned back. It wasn't that they didn't take it seriously. It wasn't that they didn't know what was coming for them, even necessarily. Like, there must have been millions of people who chose to stay because they had someone who needed them that they couldn't leave behind, you know, or they weren't going to give up their home. They weren't going to cede that ground. I think of the resistance fighters. I think of the people who stayed until the bitter end fighting in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And those people have always inspired me, but I've never felt like I would ever have the courage to be them. And I was at a meeting, I had an author event a week or two ago with Sojourn, which is a really cool queer Jewish Southerner nonprofit. And someone asked the question, like, how do we know when's the time to get out? And for a lot of trans people in red states, the answer to that question is now. They're trying to get out now. And I think they might be right. I can hear my ancestors screaming at me that the time to get out is now. But I can't leave. I can't leave. There are people that I would have to leave behind that I can't leave behind. It's not so easy to leave your home. And so I'm starting to understand. Sometimes you can't leave.
I need your help to help my community. Mercury Stardust and I are going to be doing a 30-hour live stream that ends on March 31st, Trans Day of Visibility. The goal is to raise $1 million and all of it's going to go towards trans healthcare. We want to get as many people as we can HRT, surgeries, binders, and gaffs. We need as many voices as we can, and we need to show these politicians that no matter how much they try to come for us, we will come together in solidarity to fight them. The live will be starting March 30th at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. Please be there for us.
I swiped my debit card, the cashier told me that it was declined. That made me cry.
Come live with us in the palace. There's a room waiting for you. Come on, just let us adore you. Come live with us in the palace. There's a room waiting for you.
I do love being non-binary. I love every aspect of being non-binary, except for one thing. I hate our flag. Yes! Oh, boy. Hell yeah. This joke is just for them. Everybody else leave. We're going to connect.
I've got so much potential. There's so much that I could do. I could be a singer or a dancer or a writer, but all I really want is to cut my tits off. They gotta go. I wanna cut my titties off. They don't belong where they are.
Who invited him?
Exceedingly low.
I rest my case.
And I ask you to oppose this bill.
We don't want your cis kids to be trans. We want trans and queer kids to survive.
Rule. We deserve continued access to healthcare that medical professionals have already deemed necessary. I deserve a body to feel proud of.
My pronouns are he/him, and my adjectives are hot/spicy. Good day to you all.
Thank you. Vote no on this bill.
Kids and adults who are trans will lose the right to transition and ultimately be criminalized for it.
And we can keep asking the same question Ray Bradbury asked in his classic banned book. Do you read any of the books that you burn?
I said starting point just a second ago because basic human rights should not be an end goal.
And so I'm starting to understand. Sometimes you can't leave.
Will use language that makes them sound medically credible whenever they are not. But all of this is linked in my bio at the top link in my link tree.
That